I'm Danielle Mayers, 34, and I worked my way up from a quiet logistics coordinator to leading a multi-agency response team during a national crisis. For years, I showed up for my family, loaning money, fixing problems, standing by them even when they barely acknowledged my work. But when my own father humiliated me at Thanksgiving, telling a room full of relatives I'd never be a real officer, I made a decision that shifted everything. Have you ever felt dismissed or disrespected by the very people you supported the most? If you have, share your story in the comments, because I promise you're not the only one. Before I dive into what really happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to reclaim your place after someone tried to diminish it, tap that like button and subscribe for more real stories about standing your ground and rewriting the narrative. Because what came next caught everyone off guard. I grew up in a house where uniforms meant everything. There were shadow boxes on the walls with polished metals, framed black and white photos of great uncles in formation, a folded flag and a glass case on the mantel. My dad was a decorated officer. His two brothers served in different branches, one military police, one in counterintelligence. My cousins followed suit. Most of our family gatherings eventually turned into a kind of unofficial award ceremony. Everyone trading stories, listing deployments, laughing over near misses. If you didn't have a badge or a rank, you mostly just kept quiet and passed the potatoes. As a kid, I listened to all of it like it was legend. I knew all the call signs and acronyms before I hit high school. When I finally told my family I was going into public safety, they barely reacted. I thought they didn't hear me at first. Then my dad gave a short nod and said, "Just don't expect to coast in." That was it. It wasn't that I hadn't tried to go the traditional route. I applied to 4 academies, got waitlisted twice, rejected once, and accepted to a small regional program that eventually lost funding. At that point, I pivoted, took a civilian emergency management track, then moved into interagency coordination. I went through disaster response training, qualified in incident command systems, even took specialized coursework in infrastructure vulnerability. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't TV cop stuff, but it was real work. It saved lives. Still, they saw it as lesser, not real, not worthy of mention. My mom tried to bridge the gap, quietly supporting me where she could. She sent articles about women in emergency services. She printed out one of my certifications and taped it on the fridge. It disappeared within a week. I didn't push it. I figured I'd earn their respect eventually once I proved myself, so I stayed close. I brought pies to Thanksgiving. I helped my brother cover his truck payment when he got behind. I spent 3 hours on the phone with my aunt sorting out her pension appeal. When my cousin was preparing for his fitness test, I lent him my old gear and helped him train. It didn't matter that I wasn't in uniform. When they needed something, I showed up. But the hierarchy never shifted. They still called me civilian. My cousin once introduced me to his friends as the family's logistics person. I laughed it off at the time, but it stuck with me, logistics, as if that's all it was. Even at work, I kept it compartmentalized. I didn't talk much about my family, and I never brought them to events. When I coordinated my first full-scale drill, they didn't ask about it. When my name got listed in the Regional Emergency Preparedness Bulletin, no one mentioned it. I printed a copy and left it on the kitchen counter during a weekend visit. It was gone by morning. No one said a word. I remember one night, early in my second year with the department, we had a gas main rupture. Full evacuation, multi-agency response, freezing temperatures. I was on the scene for 16 hours straight. We managed to keep the power grid online and avoided a total shutdown. I didn't sleep for 2 days. That Sunday, I drove straight from the response center to a family dinner. I was still in my responder vest when I walked in. My uncle looked up and said, "Did Halloween come early?" Everyone laughed. I did too. Then I went and changed in the downstairs bathroom. I don't think any of them were trying to be cruel. That's the thing. They weren't overtly hostile, just dismissive. Dismissive in that way that's worse than yelling because it's quiet and constant and easy to excuse. I didn't stop showing up. I thought consistency would win them over. I kept a bag in my car with spare gear and extra clothes in case I got called to a scene while visiting. I once coordinated a water distribution hub from their guest room during a heat wave. No one knocked. No one asked what I was doing. I overheard my aunt say to my mom, She's always on her phone during family time. It was around then I realized I could do everything right and still never be enough. At work, I was gaining traction. I'd been tapped to lead cross-agency drills, consulted on interstate threat scenarios, even flown out to DC for a regional strategy summit. I stopped trying to bring any of it home. They didn't want to hear about it, and I stopped needing them to. But the imbalance was still there. Every time I came back, I reverted. They joked, I absorbed it. They minimized, I stayed quiet. I gave time, effort, and money, always the first to offer, never the first to be thanked. At one point, I sat down and tried to list everything I'd contributed over the years: financial help, rides to appointments, covering for my brother when he missed his shift. It filled a page. I stared at it, wondering if any of it had actually meant anything to them, or if I was just a convenient extra. I kept that list, folded it up and tucked it into a file labeled Home. That's where I was when the call came in. It was supposed to be a routine infrastructure scan, part of a rotating federal drill, but something pinged the wrong way. I flagged it, passed it up. Within hours, it spiraled. National alert. Critical systems at risk. I was one of the first pulled into the coordination hub. None of them knew. I didn't tell them. Didn't even think about them, honestly. I was too busy locking down the city's grid protocol and mapping resource deployment lines. 4 days later, my name hit the news. I hadn't seen the clip until Rachel sent it to me with a single text. Guess they know now. I watched it once, then turned off my phone. Because part of me knew this wasn't going to fix anything. Not really. But it would change everything. I started noticing the shift after my 3rd year in emergency services. At first, it was subtle. A pause too long after I mentioned a project. A look exchanged between my dad and my uncle when I talked about a successful drill. They never outright dismissed me, but they didn't engage either. And in our family, silence wasn't neutral. It was a signal. At the time, I was coordinating a multi-jurisdictional wildfire response simulation. We had 5 counties participating, dozens of agencies. It was one of the most complex scenarios we'd ever run. I mentioned it at dinner one night, just in passing, after my uncle brought up a recent forest deployment. I wasn't bragging, just trying to connect. He nodded once, then pivoted to asking my cousin about his firearm recertification. I sat there for the rest of the meal thinking maybe I hadn't explained it right. Maybe they didn't understand what I did. So I tried again a few weeks later. We were at a birthday lunch for my niece. I casually brought up the drone integration training we'd just wrapped. My aunt gave a small laugh and said, "You're still doing dress up downtown, huh?" I smiled, didn't say anything, just kept eating, but it stuck. That year, my cousin graduated from the police academy. They threw a massive party, catered, decorations, the whole family in matching t-shirts. I helped pay for it. My aunt called me a month prior and said they were short on funds. I transferred the money that same night. When the day came, I showed up early, helped set up tables, carried chairs from the garage. They asked my cousin's old baseball coach to speak, then his high school principal. I stood by the dessert table and clapped when they called everyone to attention. Later, I overheard my cousin's girlfriend say, "I didn't know she worked in public safety too." My aunt replied, "Kind of, but she's more admin, not like real field work." I went out to my car for a few minutes after that, sat with the air on, letting it hum in the background. Then I went back in and stayed until cleanup. It wasn't just the comments, it was the pattern. When my cousin got flagged for a policy infraction at his precinct, I helped him draft the appeal. He got off with a warning. No one mentioned it again. When my brother's friend needed a reference for a logistics position, I pulled strings with someone I trusted. Got him the interview. He ghosted me afterward. When the family started planning a big group trip, I offered to help with itinerary coordination. I got a reply 2 weeks later saying, "It's better if you don't overcomplicate things." I wasn't being pushed away outright, just diminished, 1 inch at a time. I tried to rationalize it, told myself they were old school, that they didn't understand how emergency management worked, that if they just saw me in action, they'd get it. But even that idea started to fall apart. One night, I brought my dad to a recognition dinner. It wasn't formal, just a departmental event honoring service during a particularly intense flood season. I'd worked 3 straight weeks during that response, coordinating evacuations, keeping comms open across 5 agencies, balancing the National Guard's arrival with limited local resources. We kept fatalities to 0. He came, shook a few hands, sat beside me, barely spoke the entire time. When someone at the table asked what I did specifically during the flood response, I started to explain the resource deployment strategy. My dad interrupted halfway through and said, "She makes sure people have enough water bottles and that the trucks go where they're supposed to." Everyone chuckled, I smiled, took a sip of my drink, didn't correct him. Afterward, on the ride home, he said, "You looked good up there. Just remember, it's not real pressure until someone's shooting back." I didn't respond. I told Rachel about it the next day while we walked to grab coffee. She didn't say anything for a full minute, then finally said, "I think he knows exactly what you do. That's why it bothers him." I shrugged, maybe. We didn't talk about it again. There was a moment that winter when I considered backing off completely, skipping the holidays, cutting contact for a while, but I didn't. I still brought over the ham, still paid half the heating bill when my parents' furnace died, still picked up my uncle from the hospital when he had that dizzy spell, even though his sons were both off work. One night, while I was there, my aunt handed me an envelope, said it was something for someone with real boots on the ground. It was a thank you card meant for my cousin, a little handwritten note from a neighbor he'd helped after a break-in. She smiled and said, "Pass it along for me, would you? He deserves it." I did, but I also remembered I'd spent 3 weeks that fall coordinating emergency shelter access for that same neighborhood during a water outage. No one had written me anything. They started calling my cousin the real deal. My dad even joked once at a cookout, "Finally, someone's carrying on the legacy." He raised his beer and nodded toward him. I was sitting 5 feet away. Later that night, I helped clean the grill and dump the trash. My cousin had already left. I stopped bringing up work. If they asked, I gave them short answers. If they made comments, I let them pass. My mom noticed. She asked once, "Are you okay with how they talk to you?" I told her I was tired, which was true, but not the full answer. It wasn't about needing them to applaud. It was about the fact that I gave everything, time, help, loyalty, and got barely a sliver of acknowledgement in return. Not even curiosity, just assumption and dismissal. At one point, I found out my cousin had told a group of friends that I worked in traffic coordination or something. I laughed when Rachel told me. "I guess I'll just start saying I run a sign spinning crew." She didn't laugh, she just looked at me, said, "This is the part of the movie where the protagonist quietly builds an empire while everyone keeps underestimating her." I smiled, but I didn't feel powerful. I just felt backgrounded. Still, I stayed in it. Not for them, but because I believed in the work. And because when real emergencies happened, it was our team that made the difference. They didn't see it, they didn't need to. At least not yet. Thanksgiving that year started like the others. Too much food, too many people, and not enough chairs. I brought 2 pies, pecan and apple, and made sure to get there early enough to help set the table. My cousin had recently been promoted, so I assumed most of the conversation would circle around that. I was used to it by then. I'd learned to smile, nod, refill drinks, and blend into the background when needed. We did the usual, awkward hugs, side conversations in the kitchen, someone forgetting to thaw the rolls in time. My aunt asked me to carry out the gravy boat. I did. No one asked what I'd been working on lately. No one ever did. Dinner went smoothly, or at least uneventfully. The kids were loud, the adults were louder, and someone spilled cranberry sauce down the front of a tablecloth my grandmother had made. My mom looked like she wanted to say something but didn't. She rarely did at these things. I sat between my youngest cousin and my brother. Across from me was my dad. Next to him, my uncle, the same one who still called me our logistics queen whenever he introduced me to someone new. After the plates were cleared and the desserts were being passed around, my dad tapped his glass with the back of his spoon. Lightly, just enough to get attention. He stood up. "I just want to say something," he said. "We've got a strong family, generations of service. Men who wore the badge, served overseas, faced danger head-on, real protectors." There were a few nods, a couple of small claps. He went on. "I'm proud of that, proud of the men who keep the tradition going. My son, He clapped my cousin on the back, is doing just that, like his grandfather, like me, like we were raised to. Then he paused just for a second, but it was enough. He looked straight at me. And some people, well, some people like to play pretend, but pretending isn't service. Logistics isn't risk. My fork was still in my hand. I remember that. I hadn't even taken a bite of pie yet. He looked away, back toward the room. You'll never be a real officer. The silence landed like a dropped dish. My aunt, who'd had just enough wine to say whatever she wanted, snorted. She's still playing cop. The laughter was short but sharp. Someone coughed. My cousin looked down at his plate. My uncle took a sip of his beer and stared at the ceiling. I stood up. No one moved. I walked to the coat rack, slipped on my jacket. My mom opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I grabbed my keys and walked out. There wasn't a scene, no shouting, no slammed doors, just the steady sound of my boots on the driveway and the engine turning over. When I got home, I sat in the car for a while, didn't cry, didn't move, just let the heater run and stared at the dash. Rachel called around 10. She hadn't gone to her own family's dinner, said she wasn't up for the usual questions. She asked how mine went. I told her. He said I'll never be a real officer. She didn't ask who, she didn't need to. She paused, then said, "Do you want me to come over?" I said no, I just wanted to be alone. The next morning, I woke up early, cleaned the entire apartment, did laundry, rearranged my bookshelves, anything to keep my hands busy. My phone buzzed a few times, group messages, photos from the dinner, someone tagging me in a picture I'd been cropped halfway out of. No direct messages, no apology. Sunday night, I got an email from my supervisor. They were assembling a small team for a regional infrastructure scan, something routine but time-sensitive. She asked if I could step in. I replied immediately, yes. I didn't go to the leftovers brunch, didn't answer my aunt's call, didn't respond when my brother texted, "You okay?" He didn't follow up. I told myself this was the break I'd been waiting for. A chance to finally put some distance between who they saw me as and who I really was. I didn't feel angry, not exactly, just removed. At work, no one cared who my father was. No one looked at me sideways when I ran a logistics brief or flagged an intel discrepancy. They just listened, adjusted, followed my lead. That week, I worked long hours. The scan evolved into something bigger. The threat indicators weren't adding up, and by midweek, we'd looped in federal contacts. I didn't think about Thanksgiving again until Rachel brought it up. "You gonna say anything to them?" she asked. "No." She nodded, okay. I think she understood that it wasn't about one comment. It never had been. It was about years of being sidelined, about jokes layered in sarcasm, about never being allowed to be the expert in a room full of people who'd never seen what I'd seen. That Thanksgiving was just the moment the curtain dropped. There was no rebuilding after that, no next family dinner, no olive branches. I stopped waiting to be accepted. I just kept going. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling while the words replayed in my head. "You'll never be a real officer." Over and over in my dad's voice, like he was standing next to me. By midnight, I got up and walked into the kitchen, poured water, stood by the sink, holding the glass but never drank from it. It was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about calling Rachel, but I didn't want to talk yet, not out loud, not until I figured out what I even wanted to say. I opened my laptop and logged in to the department portal. My supervisor had listed open rotation slots earlier that week: incident support, infrastructure drill prep, a few late-night dispatch coordination roles. I sent her a message. "If the rotation for infrastructure ops is still open, I want in." She responded 10 minutes later. "Confirmed, you're in starting Monday. We're expecting changes could escalate." I replied, "Understood, I'll be ready." Then I called Rachel. She picked up immediately. "What happened?" I didn't say much, just the core of it. My dad's toast, my aunt's comment, the silence that followed. She didn't interrupt, just listened. "I kept thinking someone would stop it," I said. "Just one person." "But they didn't." "No." Rachel exhaled. You've done more for people in 1 month than some of them will in a lifetime. I didn't answer. We stayed on the phone until 2 a.m., neither of us saying much. I could hear her TV in the background. I think she just wanted to be there in case I cracked. I didn't, but the weight in my chest stayed heavy. The next day, I started early. I was at the response center before most people had their first coffee. I didn't mention the holiday, didn't bring it up in passing. I just plugged in and got to work. By the end of the day, I'd reviewed 2 regional risk assessments, coordinated a conference call with the Emergency Utility Board, and flagged 3 systems as vulnerable for follow-up. It felt good to move again. Useful, clean. But at night, I still replayed it. Not just the moment at dinner, all of it, every silent insult I'd brushed off. Every time I offered help and was treated like a side character. Every family event where I cleaned dishes while someone else got a toast. I thought about the birthday party where they gave my cousin a plaque for carrying the legacy. I thought about the night I drove my dad to urgent care because his blood pressure spiked and he didn't want anyone else to know. I thought about the time my aunt cried over her pension being withheld and I spent 2 weekends helping her organize documents to fight it. And then I thought about the way none of that mattered when they had a chance to show me respect. It wasn't that they forgot, it was that they didn't care to remember. Rachel stopped by that week. She brought 2 sandwiches and didn't ask if she could come in. She just set the bag on my counter, kicked off her shoes, and sat on the floor while I sorted response maps on my laptop. I'm not going back, I told her, not to another family event. She didn't look surprised. I've already been pulled back in a dozen times. Every holiday, every emergency, I show up, I bring food, I give rides, and it's like none of it means anything. It means something, she said. Not to them. She was quiet for a while, then said, then stop giving it to them. They're not the audience. That stuck with me. I wrote it on a Post-it note and stuck it on the edge of my monitor. They're not the audience. That became my filter. Every time I wanted to explain myself, to email my dad a breakdown of what I actually do, or text my cousin after another one of his passive comments, I stopped. Deleted it. Reminded myself that if someone wants to misunderstand you, you can't educate them out of it. Instead, I poured it all into the work. I picked up extra shifts. Took the lead on drill coordination. I knew something bigger was coming. There were too many moving pieces, too many quiet conversations between agencies to ignore it. I didn't know what, but I felt it. My phone buzzed one night during a planning session. My aunt, missed call, then a message, hope you're doing okay, let me know if you want to talk. I didn't answer. The next morning, she sent a photo of a thank you card I'd written her 3 years earlier when she helped me find a second-hand couch for my apartment. The message underneath said, "We don't forget what you've done." I still didn't answer. Because words are easy, and memory is selective. I wasn't looking for a fight, I just needed the noise to stop. Rachel asked if I wanted to block them. No, I said, I want to hear the silence, that's the point. For the first time in years, I stopped reaching out. I didn't send holiday texts, didn't comment on their social media, didn't RSVP to anything, and they didn't follow up. I got 2 messages from my mom during that period. She didn't take sides, she never did. But her second message just said, "I'm proud of you, always have been." That was the only one I saved. December was a blur of operations and quiet escalation. The threat indicators we'd flagged started lining up, small vulnerabilities across critical infrastructure, timed access pings, localized delays. It wasn't panic-inducing, not yet, but it was real. When my supervisor called me in to brief the regional liaison, I didn't hesitate. I'd already built the models, reviewed the protocols, mapped out the redundancies. I was ready. I didn't think once about my family during that call. Didn't wonder what they'd think or whether they'd finally be impressed. That was the shift. It wasn't that I didn't care anymore. I just didn't need their validation. And I wasn't angry, not really, just clear. No more explaining myself, no more invitations, no more pretending we were all in the same room, working from the same values. I would do the work. And I would let the results speak. The announcement came on a Tuesday. Quiet, direct, buried 3 bullet points deep in the morning interagency dispatch. National response drill elevated, threat assessment ongoing, full asset integration required. By noon, everyone in the building knew it wasn't just an exercise. They kept calling it a sim, but the urgency didn't match a test. People were moving faster. Emails were tighter. Nobody asked for clarifications, they just executed. That only happens when someone at the top is already scared. I called Rachel during my break, told her I was staying on site indefinitely. "They finally put you in charge?" she asked. "Incident command," I said, "effective immediately." "About time." The briefing that followed ran long. We were coordinating across 5 states. Power, water, comms, everything had to be secured and mirrored through backup systems. I was assigned liaison between the federal continuity team and local emergency ops. I didn't flinch. I knew what the job required. I'd spent the last 6 years preparing for it, whether they acknowledged it or not. We ran silent drills for 2 days straight. I barely slept. I kept a spare shirt in my bag and rotated shifts with 2 junior coordinators who'd never seen a real activation. They looked to me like I had all the answers. I didn't, but I made decisions, kept things moving. The room stayed focused because I stayed focused. The media wasn't briefed at first. We worked under blackout conditions, but rumors started to spread. People noticed federal vehicles near utility hubs, workers getting redirected, communications throttling for testing. Everyone pretended it was part of the plan. It was. Day 4, the cyber attack hit. First, it was just delays. Then traffic signals dropped across 2 districts. Emergency lines flooded. Water monitoring spiked. All systems pointed to coordinated interference, not just a breach, but a targeted disruption. I was already in the command center when the call came through. Activate escalation protocol. I didn't hesitate. I pulled the binders from the top shelf, ran the checklist, and started the coordination call. Every department lead had 30 seconds to confirm their role. No one asked me to slow down. No one questioned the chain of command. It was my operation now. The room was cold, lights dimmed, everyone spoke in clipped tones. I assigned tasks, approved reroutes, and flagged the most vulnerable grids. My team moved fast. We got eyes on all major intersections, locked down the public transit override system, and isolated the backup servers. 12 hours in, we'd prevented a cascade failure. Barely. It was close, closer than we ever admitted publicly. Somewhere around midnight, I checked my phone. One message, my father. "Hope you're staying safe." No punctuation, no call, just that. I stared at it for a moment, thought about replying. I didn't. I set the phone down, face down, and kept working. By morning, the worst of it had stabilized. We issued a controlled statement to the press. Routine systems testing encountered an error, which has since been resolved. A lie, technically, but not the first one we'd told to keep people calm. A White House representative arrived 2 hours later. Quiet, formal, asked to speak with me privately. I led her to the side office, briefed her on our response, showed her the handoff logs, gave her access to the network shell. She listened, didn't interrupt. Then she said, "There's going to be a press conference. We'd like you there." I didn't say yes immediately. I just nodded. Went back to the main room. We were still cycling through backup scenarios. Around noon, Rachel texted, "You're trending." I checked the link. A local reporter had caught wind of the drill-turned response. Someone had posted a photo of me directing ops, vest on, radio clipped to my collar, posture stiff from 40 hours of tension. The caption just said, "The woman holding the city together." I closed the browser. Later that day, one of my junior coordinators brought me coffee. He was young, smart, still learning how to balance urgency with precision. He said, "I didn't know you had this kind of command experience." I didn't correct him. He paused, then added, "My sister S in emergency services too. She said you're the one everyone watches." I thanked him, told him to rotate out and rest. Then I sat down and looked at the command chart. Every cell had a contact. Every contact had a response time. We had operational control. The crisis wasn't over, but we weren't in free fall anymore. I picked up my phone. The message from my dad was still there. I deleted it. That night, I slept in the break room. 2 hours, maybe 3. When I woke up, the lights were still low, the monitors still blinking, everything in place. The city was still standing. I didn't check social media again, didn't call home, I didn't need to. They knew. And that was enough. We stopped keeping track of the days after a while. No one really slept. We took shifts, short ones, and caught rest wherever we could, conference room chairs, the floor under desks, once even in an elevator between levels when someone couldn't keep their eyes open. You learn quickly how to survive on caffeine, adrenaline, and momentum, but it catches up to you eventually. The power grid was back online mostly. Transit ran, but on emergency override. The water system stayed vulnerable, and we had rolling communication blackouts in 2 districts. We kept the public calm by giving them updates just steady enough to suggest control. We didn't lie, but we didn't tell the full story either. Not yet. People were scared. You could hear it in the way they asked questions, hesitating, repeating themselves, pausing just long enough between words to betray their doubt. On day 6, someone from the mayor's office pulled me aside and asked how close we really were to failure. I gave them a number that made sense. Then I walked away before they could ask for a second one. Internally, we were still pushing uphill. Supply lines were strained. Emergency contracts were slow to activate. Half of our federal contacts rotated out after 72 hours and had to be replaced by people unfamiliar with the terrain. At one point, a critical server room flooded because a backflow valve hadn't been properly inspected in years. We ran the system manually for 6 hours while it physically rewired access through an old training hub. No one panicked, we didn't have time to. The team pulled through. I kept my voice even during check-ins. I split shifts strategically, paired strengths with weaknesses, shielded my newest leads from direct pressure when I could. I never raised my voice. Never let frustration show. Not because I didn't feel it, because I knew the room was watching me. If I cracked, they would. And if they cracked, people would get hurt. By the end of the week, we had a full stabilization plan mapped and distributed. Comms were functioning again. Law enforcement resumed full control of field operations. The city was tired but steady. No fatalities, no infrastructure collapse, minimal injuries. That was when the request came through. A motorcade was en route. The president had been briefed and wanted a local update, in person. There would be a conference. The press was already assembling. Security was being deployed to our location within the hour. I assumed I'd be asked to write the briefing, maybe deliver it behind closed doors to the liaison team. I didn't expect the follow-up. They wanted me to stand beside him, at the podium. I was still in the same uniform I'd been wearing for 3 days, patched knees, coffee stained near the collar. My badge was clipped onto a secondary vest because the first one had been soaked during the server room incident. I didn't have time to change, didn't ask to. The Secret Service arrived first, did their sweep, then the press buses, then the black cars. It was surreal, but not in the way people imagine. It wasn't cinematic. It was practical, tense, highly choreographed. The world kept moving around us, even as people started pointing cameras and attaching microphones. He walked in like he'd done it 100 times, because he had. He shook hands with the director, nodded at the mayor, then turned to me. "You're the one they've been quoting," he said. I nodded. "Good work." We stood side by side for the briefing. I said nothing, just held the binder and stayed still while he listed our response achievements. He used words like asterisk heroic coordination asterisk and exemplary leadership under pressure. I kept my face neutral. The lights from the cameras were too bright. I couldn't see who was watching from behind them, but I knew. I knew they'd see it. The press conference aired live, local and national, every major outlet. Clips hit the internet within minutes. Still shots circulated, me in uniform, standing beside the president, face composed, badge visible. I didn't tell anyone in my family it was happening. I didn't need to. Rachel texted first. A screenshot, just my face next to a chyron that read, "Local leader GUIDES city through crisis." All she wrote was, "Told you." My supervisor patted my shoulder afterward, said I handled it well. I nodded, thanked her, and went back to the command room. There was still work to do. That night, I slept on a cot in the lower wing. No windows, just white noise and the steady hum of server racks nearby. I woke up once around 3 a.m. to check the city status feed. Everything held. I didn't check my phone. Not until the next morning. It was full. Emails, missed calls, messages, most from numbers I knew by heart. My brother sent a blurry photo of the TV screen. Just the caption, "Holy crap, that's you." My aunt's message was longer. "We just saw you on the news. You looked calm, strong, like you were running the whole thing. I didn't know you were doing all that." There were more: my cousin, a friend of my dad's, someone I hadn't spoken to since high school. My dad hadn't messaged yet. I left them all unread. I got coffee, sat on the bench outside the response center, and watched a utility crew across the street finish replacing a busted transformer. One of the guys waved. I waved back. I kept thinking about something Rachel said weeks before, when all of this hadn't started yet. They're not the audience. She was right, but part of me still wanted them to understand what it had taken to get here. Not the cameras, not the press conference. All the years before that, the ones they never asked about, the work they never saw, the loyalty they took for granted. Now they had a glimpse. But I wasn't sure it would change anything, not really. Still, I'd shown them what they refused to believe. And I hadn't needed a single word to do it. It was 3 days after the press conference. The city was back to near normal, at least on the surface. Buses ran, schools reopened. Power flickered only in places that had always had issues. We were out of emergency protocols, though we kept a soft operations team on call for another week just in case. I'd moved back into my apartment, cleaned for the first time in 2 weeks, ate food that didn't come from a vending machine or emergency pantry. Let my body crash the way it always did after a long deployment, slow, heavy, aching. I slept too much, then not at all. I tried to watch a movie but got up halfway through and organized my kitchen instead. I was making toast when I saw him. Through the window, standing by the curb. It was my dad. He didn't knock, just stood there, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding something, a folded paper or maybe a file. I couldn't tell from that distance. I turned off the burner, stood there for a few seconds trying to decide what to do, then walked to the door. When I opened it, he didn't say anything, just looked at me. His eyes were tired like mine. Then he held out the paper. It was a clipping from the local newspaper, front page photo of the press conference, me standing next to the president. There was a headline about leadership and resilience. He'd circled my name in pen, not neatly, just once, like he was marking something he didn't want to forget. "I clipped this for your grandpa," he said. "He would have been proud." His voice was steady, not soft, but not defensive either, just matter of fact. I didn't say anything. I just took the paper and stepped aside. He hesitated, then walked in. It was the first time he'd been to my place in years. I didn't offer a tour. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. It felt like the only neutral thing I could do. We sat at the table. Not opposite each other, just off-center, the way you sit when you're not sure how to talk to someone. He didn't touch his coffee, just looked around. At the framed certifications on the wall, the emergency radio on my shelf, the folded responder vest by the door. He didn't say sorry. And I didn't ask him to. We sat like that for a while, awkward, silent, human. I asked how the others were. He said my brother was working late shifts, my cousin had gotten into a new precinct, and my aunt had called to say she was surprised. I hadn't told them I was doing real stuff now. I laughed once, sharp and short. He didn't. Then he said, "You were right not to tell us." I didn't expect that. He looked down at his hands. We got comfortable thinking the only work that mattered was the kind we recognized. The kind we did. We forgot there were other ways to serve. He didn't say more after that, just sipped the coffee, still warm barely. When he stood up to leave, he looked like he wanted to add something, but he didn't. He just nodded once and let himself out. I sat there after he left, the paper still on the table. I didn't feel relieved or triumphant. It wasn't that kind of moment. There was no music cue, no speech, just a shift, a small one. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. Later that day, Rachel came by. She brought soup because she knew I wouldn't cook, I told her what happened. She said, "Did he actually say sorry?" "No." "Do you care?" I thought about it, then said, "I don't think I need him to." She didn't press, just handed me a spoon and sat beside me. That night, I reread the article he'd clipped. I'd seen a dozen versions of it already: TV blurbs, internal write-ups, social posts. But this one, the way he'd marked it, the way he'd carried it, it felt different. Like maybe he finally saw me. Not fully, not all at once. But enough to try, enough to stand in the cold and wait. I didn't text him, but I didn't delete his message either. We'd always had a complicated kind of love, the quiet kind, sometimes the conditional kind. But that day, sitting in my kitchen, I saw something else, a crack in the wall, a space where something new might start. I wasn't naive. I knew it would take more. Years, probably. And I wasn't going to make myself small again just to keep the peace. But I also knew this. I didn't need their approval to do the work. I never had. And now, for the first time, they knew it too. Now, every Thanksgiving, I sign up for a shift. Not because I'm trying to prove anything. Not anymore. I just like the quiet of the command center when most of the city is home. I like walking the floor with a coffee in hand, checking in with the overnight leads, making sure the watch desk has what it needs. I like hearing the low murmur of radios in the background and knowing everything's holding steady because a team of people, my people, are keeping it that way. I don't miss the holiday table. The noise, the tension, the effort of pretending nothing's wrong. There's a calm in the work that I never found sitting between relatives who didn't understand me. Sometimes the younger team members ask why I volunteer. I give them a shrug and say it's tradition. That usually gets a laugh. But it's more than that. The year after the press conference, the invitations slowed down. At first, there was a polite pause. People didn't know what to say or if I'd even respond. Then the tone shifted. My cousin texted once to say, "We're keeping it small this year, just immediate family." I knew it wasn't about space. The next year, no one reached out. By then, I was giving talks, keynote speeches, panels on infrastructure resilience and crisis management. Recruiters started asking if I'd mentor young women going into emergency command. I said yes to most of them, not because I had extra time, but because I remembered what it felt like to stand alone in a room full of people who'd already made up their minds about you. I wasn't interested in being anyone's inspiration, but I knew I could be a reference point, a name someone could drop when they were being underestimated, a story they could cite when someone asked if they were really prepared for a leadership role. I never brought it up with my family. I stopped tracking who watched, who commented, who stayed silent. That part of my life was done. But the world has a way of circling back. A few months ago, I was asked to help train municipal leadership for a neighboring state. It was part of a national pilot program. The kind of thing that sounded boring until you realized it was laying the groundwork for a full crisis simulation spanning 9 counties. On the second day, a woman in her early 30s came up to me. She said her daughter had seen my photo in a magazine, taped it to her bedroom wall, and told her class she wanted to be a boss like this. She pulled out her phone and showed me the picture. It was the same one from the press conference, me in uniform, looking off to the side while the president spoke. I didn't know what to say. I just smiled and thanked her. I still get the occasional jab from extended family. A cousin will post something about real heroes in uniform with an edge to it. My aunt still refers to my job as administrative leadership, like she's trying to make it sound smaller than it is. I let it go. Most days, I don't even register it. Last week, my little cousin, she's 9 now, told her teacher she wanted to grow up to be like my aunt, the one on TV with the president. Her mom texted me the quote with a laughing emoji, like it was a joke, but I knew what it meant. It meant she'd seen me. And maybe that's all I ever wanted from the beginning, not applause, not acceptance, just to be seen clearly. I don't need a seat at their table anymore. I built my own. It's not fancy. It doesn't come with inherited stories or old medals or decades of tradition, but it holds. It holds weight. It holds power. And the people who sit there with me, my team, my mentors, the young women I coach, the first responders I serve with, they know what it cost to build it. They know I didn't inherit it. I assembled it one piece at a time, through shifts no one noticed, nights no one thanked me for, and decisions that kept people alive. I still visit my mom sometimes. We don't talk about the past, but she keeps a copy of that newspaper clipping in a drawer next to her tea bags. I saw it once when I was helping her put groceries away. She didn't mention it, just closed the drawer and asked if I wanted lemon in my tea. I said no, but I remembered. There's no grand ending to this story, no dramatic reconciliation, just a quiet truth: some things break and stay broken. But that doesn't mean you can't keep building, doesn't mean you can't make something better. Every day, I walk into rooms I was once told I didn't belong in. And I don't walk quietly anymore. Thanks for sticking with me through the whole story. If you've ever had to earn respect the hard way or been underestimated by your own family, drop a comment below. How did you handle it? Did they ever come around? And if this story hit close to home, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I've got more real stories coming your way, about standing your ground, reclaiming your voice, and building something no one can take from you. Your story matters too. Let's hear it.